Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We were just waiting for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
now it's time for us to begin this first memorial oration um, of Sri Rajnikanth Turakhia. So we welcome all of you who joined with us today on behalf of the Optometric Association of Tamil Nanbarhar. So I know that all of you must be really excited about listening to the keynote lecture on recent advances in optical management of myopia. But before we jump ahead into the talk, this is a quick view of the program for you today. So first, I would request Mr. Dinesh Sar, the founding treasurer of OATN, to speak a few words about this memorial in general, followed by my introduction to the chief guest, and then the chief guest oration would begin. So I now hand over the mic to Mr. Dinesh Sir for saying a few words about the memorial. A quick housekeeping announcement. Request everyone to be very conscious about your mics. Please keep it on mute, because if it's not on mute, then it's going to disrupt the entire flow of the oration. So please keep it on mute. And over to you, Dinesh sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's indeed a privilege to introduce Shri Rajnibai Turakhia, who was my friend, philosopher, and guide for almost 4 decades. He is of the same age as my dad, but he was very friendly with me and friendly with everybody in the industry. Shri Rajnibai Turakhia was one of the first person from the optical industry to also qualify as an optometrist and bring the two arms of eye care together, the optometric and the optical industry. He finished his optometry from the government hospital in 1964 and later had his specialization and hands-on training at the Moorfields Hospital in London. As the capacity of Vice President of Indian Optometric Association, he represented Indian Optometric Association at the New York Optometry Conference. He was the Indian Optometric Association president twice, and a very active member, a person who would guide and enlighten everybody who comes in touch with him. An ever smiling person. He has received various awards, and he was part of Johnson & Johnson, SLR, all the major vision care groups. I feel short of words to introduce him. It's like we have a saying in Hindi that I'm trying to show a lamp to the sun. He was a fatherly figure and a good advisor to anybody who went to him for any kind of advice. He would guide them, hold his hand, and see that he reaches his destination. With these few words, I hand over back to Rizwana.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for that few yet powerful words. And so now it's time for us to move into the oration. So, of course, I have 3 minutes to introduce Professor Padmaja, but 3 minutes is not enough, but I'll try to do justice. So, Professor Padmaja Sankaridurg is the head of the myopia program and also head of the intellectual property of the Brian Holden Vision Institute and a conjoint professor at the School of Optometry and Vision Science, Sydney, Australia. So her journey started with her B.Opt degree from the prestigious ESO in 1989, followed by her PhD in 1999 from the UNSW. And she also holds a master's in intellectual property in 2012 from the University of Technology, Australia. And in between her bachelor's and PhD journey, she has also served as the chief of contact lens services at the LB Prasad Eye Institute for a number of years. Her innovative ideas have led to the creation of the Global Myopia Center, an online resource center loaded with tools, resources, education, articles, and infographics made available to the general public and eye care professionals. She's been instrumental in helping to develop tools in the innovation center, such as the myopia calculator and the myopia guidelines that many of us use. And she's a globally recognized leader in this field. She's participated as an expert at the WHO BHVI Global Meeting of Myopia 2015 and is an advisory board member and also a member of the Interventions and Harmonization Committee, International Myopia Institute. And she's an advisory board member for the Review of Myopia Management, which is an online digital publication resource. And in 2015, she received the Garland Clay Award from the American Academy of Optometry. The figure on the right side is when she received that award for her work on spectacle lenses designed to reduce progression of myopia, 12-month results in the Optometry and Vision Science Journal. And she's been researching myopia for over 15 years now, and her research interests span across refractive development, myopia onset and progression, strategies to control myopia, and economic burden of myopia. She's over 85 articles, I guess it must have increased now, in peer-reviewed journals, and co-inventor on many patents and publications, authored several book chapters, supervised masters and PhD students, and has delivered many podium presentations and orations. And in 2018, she was named as one of the most influential women in the optical and optical industry in the innovator category by the Vision Monday. And while she was receiving this award, she had said a few words which I thought inspired me personally. She said, "Work hard, strive for excellence, be compassionate to those around you, and if the situation demands it, stand up for yourself and those around you. Our actions, either individual or collective, will support other women in the future." And this has been one of my personal inspiring quotes in the recent past. In 2020, she was awarded the Optometrist of the Year award by the Turakhia School of Optics and Optometry. So she's been my personal inspiration, as I just told, and I would in fact fondly motivate one of my close colleagues working on myopia to become the next Padmaja Sankaridurg for India. And on behalf of the Optometric Association of Tamil Nanbargal, we welcome Professor Padmaja Sankaridurg, a global leader in myopia, to deliver the first Shree Rajnikanth Turakhia Memorial Oration on recent advances in optical management of myopia. Over to you, Professor Padmaja.
Thank you, Rizwana, for that, for those kind words and a really lengthy introduction, which I did not anticipate. I'm going to try and share my screen first, make sure everything works okay here. Is everyone able to see my slides okay? Rizwana, could you tell me if you're able to see my slides?
You shared your screen? I'm not.
Yes, I did.
1 second. We do not see your. Okay. Yes.
Now.
Yes.
And now you can see my screen,
yes.
Right?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to start by thanking the Tamil Nadu Optometric Association for inviting me to present the first memorial lecture for the late senior Turakhia. When I was asked to present this lecture, this quote, another favorite of mine, crossed my mind, because I always had the impression that the late senior Turakhia was a very hardworking person who worked very much into his late years and who was very passionate for his community as well as the profession. So I pay my respects, and I know that the Turakhia tradition will live on. I know Snehal quite well, a very humble person and a gentleman to the core. And I know that he's continuing his father's work in looking after the community. So again, I pay my respects. And with that, I'll start my talk. So my task today is to bring you all up to date on the recent advances in the optical management of myopia. Before I get into the talk, I have some disclosures to make. I'm a co-inventor on patents and patent applications related to myopia control. And my employer, the Brian Holland Vision Institute, has commercial interest in the area of myopia. Now, they say a picture says 1,000 words, and all I have to do is show you some pictures which shows you why we are discussing myopia today. So this is a photo taken from 9 to 10-year-old school children in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. And as you can see, more than half of the class is myopic. And this is quite relevant for us. This was the incoming class, optometry class, the first ever optometry student class from Ho Chi Minh City. And again, you're going to be hard pressed to see somebody who is not myopic. Now, you might ask, what about India? Now, if we look at the literature that was that came out of India, this was in the late 1990s, you can see that the prevalence of myopia as reported then was quite low. There was only about approximately 7% of myopia. But when we look at the literature from the recent years, you can see that there's been what seems to be a sharp increase in the prevalence of myopia. And this particular graph here is a study that was conducted by the Brian Holland Vision Institute. This was a study that we conducted in Hyderabad. And as you can see here, we monitored children. This was a cross-sectional study. We looked at children age 6 years, and we also looked at young adults. And you can see that the prevalence of myopia is much higher than what was reported previously. So I think it would be fair to say that we are looking at approximately 30% prevalence of myopia in India at the moment. Another picture from, this is 7-year-old school children in China. And again, just from this little snapshot here, you can see that most of them are myopic. So what does that mean? Many of you are probably quite familiar with this graphic. This was a study that we conducted and reported in 2016, where we looked at all the evidence up until then, and we projected into the future. We looked at evidence up until 2010. And what this graphic shows is that in the year 2020, approximately 33% of the population are myopic. But what it says is that if we do not change the trajectory in terms of the risk factors for myopia, then by the year 2050, nearly half of the world's population, or 1 of 2 people, are likely to be myopic. More importantly, it also says that by the year 2050, 1 out of 10 are likely to be highly myopic, that is, have myopia of -5 diopters or worse. And that is quite important for us to realize, because as many of us know, high myopia is associated with risk of vision impairment as well as sight-threatening complications in an adult life. So in terms of myopia control, what we are trying to do is we are trying to address the problem so that the eye does not achieve higher levels of myopia in the future, and that they don't have complications associated with high myopia in later life. It's a bit like diabetes. So you're trying to control the risk so that you don't get complications at a later stage. And at the present time, the past 2 decades, we've had a number of advances. And at the present time, we have strategies that seem to be working to reduce the risk of onset of myopia, and that's with outdoor. And when a person is already myopic, we now have a range of options ranging from contact lenses to spectacles, atropine, as well as surgery when the myopia is stable. Now, I'm not going to go into details of all the hypotheses that are out there to explain as to why optical products can slow the progression of myopia. But in this particular slide here, I've listed the hypotheses that are considered to be the most relevant in terms of products that we now looking at. Many of you are probably familiar with the accommodative lag dysfunction hypothesis. This was quite prevalent up until 2010. And the hypothesis states that, myopia is associated with excessive near work. And when you're doing excessive near work, then there is said to be accommodative dysfunction or accommodative lag. Accommodative lag means that the image is behind the retina, and that means that there is hyperopic defocus at the retina. And the hypothesis states that hyperopic defocus causes the eye to elongate, and that was the reason why it was thought that myopia was progressing. More recently, the field has shifted to considering not only the central retina, but also the peripheral retina. And when we talk about peripheral retinal hyperopic defocus, what it means is that you take a myopic eye and you correct them with a single vision spectacle lens. Much of the spectacle lenses, so most of the correction at the present time is with single vision spectacle lenses. Then what you do is centrally you place the image on the retina, but in the periphery, the image falls behind the retina, or there is considered to be peripheral retinal hyperopic defocus. And it is thought that this then causes the eye to elongate. I'll talk about the global retinal image quality, which is yet another hypothesis. We at the Brian Holland Vision Institute have optical designs based on this hypothesis. A more recent hypothesis talks about retinal contrast. Unlike the other hypothesis, what this hypothesis considers is that high contrast signals between two adjacent photoreceptors, two adjacent cones, is thought to deliver a stimulating signal to the eye, and it is thought that this causes the eye to grow. So this particular hypothesis actually talks about dampening the contrast at the retinal photoreceptors. And at the present time, there is one particular strategy called side glass vision lenses that are available, that are being tested, and they have delivered some of their results, which seems to say that this strategy might also be effective. So with that little bit of background on the hypothesis, I'm going to try and bring you up to date in terms of the strategies that are currently available. So today, specifically, we'll talk about spectacles, contact lenses, as well as a little bit about orthokeratology. When we look at spectacle lenses, so the type of spectacle lenses that have been designed to control the progression of myopia range from the progressive addition lenses or bifocal lenses to the more recent peripheral defocus spectacles. And the peripheral defocus spectacles have taken a new turn or a new breakthrough with what we call as multiple segment spectacle lenses. So in this particular graph here, what we are doing is we are comparing to how much of reduction we can get with these myopia controlled spectacle lenses in comparison to single vision spectacle lenses. So the green bar is the amount of reduction we are seeing with respect to spherical equivalent. The blue bar is the amount of reduction we are seeing with respect to axial length. So generally, when we do clinical trials, we look at both of these outcomes, both change in spherical equivalent as well as change in axial length. And change in axial length is, in a sense, the most important indicator because it's telling us that the eye growth is slower with some of these strategies in comparison to the other strategies. And these are all done using cycloplegic autorefraction. And most of these studies are 1 to 2 years in duration. So if we look at the history with respect to the myopia controlled spectacle lenses, we have to go from bottom up to the chart. So when we look at the progressive addition spectacle lenses, the first study that came out of Hong Kong, PolyU, was quite promising for progressive addition spectacle lenses. But after that, you can see that there have been a number of studies and the success was not as significant as what was found in the first study. And reason why we always need to have validation of results in later studies. So these are basically progressive addition spectacle lenses, except for the bifocal, executive bifocals with and without prism, as well as certain subgroups. For example, high ESO4s, we can see that progressive addition spectacle lenses generally gave us myopia control of less than 20%. So in roundabouts 2010, we went ahead with the peripheral retinal hyperopic defocus, and we tested 3 designs. These designs have what we call continuous power profile. So the power profile continuously increases into the periphery. Out of the 3 designs, only one of the designs, and this design also was effective only in a certain subgroup, which is children with parental myopia. And you can see that there were a couple of other studies that followed our studies. And again, the effectivity with the peripheral retinal hyperopic defocus with the continuous power profiles wasn't all that great. But more recently, we've had this huge breakthrough with what we call the multiple segment peripheral defocus. Again, going with the peripheral defocus strategy, but what we call as peripheral defocus or defocus incorporated multiple segment lenses. So this lens, again, was developed from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, and it is manufactured and sold by Hoya Corporation as Mio Smart lenses. And this lens, as with some of the other designs, peripheral defocus designs, has a clear central zone, which corrects for the person's refractive error at the distance. And in the mid-periphery, instead of having a continuous power profile, what you see is multiple segments of plus power. These multiple segments of plus power are thought to induce or reduce hyperopic defocus or induce myopic defocus at the peripheral retina. So each of these segments is plus 3.5 diopters, and it is approximately 1 millimeter in diameter. So far, there's been one study that has been reported with these lenses, and that came out from Hong Kong PolyU. They considered 160 children, 8 to 13 years of age. And what you see here is that the lens was able to slow the progression of myopia by nearly half over a 2-year period, and slightly more for axial length. Or in a sense, they're generally comparable. So this was quite effective, and this lens is now available in many countries across the world, including here in Australia, as well as in Singapore, Hong Kong, China, Taiwan, and so on. Now, more recently, Essilor Corporation, they have also been working on a myopia control strategy, which is somewhat similar to the Hoya lens. And this lens is referred to as Stellest. And what they talk about, we don't have any peer-reviewed publications. We only know based on what is being presented at the various meetings. So this again has a clear central zone, very similar to some of the lenses, so that you correct for the refractive error at the distance. And in the periphery of the lens are multiple rings. Each of the rings has got multiple segments, very similar to what we saw with the DIMS lens. So in this little schematic here, you see those little multiple segments. And it is said that these rings generate what they call a volume of defocus in front of the peripheral retina. So Essilor, it appears that they conducted clinical studies using 2 such lens designs. One of them is referred to as highly aspheric lens technology. And the second one is called slightly aspheric lens technology. And they ran a study with the control group. Very recently, they presented the 1-year progression data. And what they found is that the highly aspherical lens seems to be more effective than the slightly aspherical lens. We do not have any data on whether there is positive power and how much of positive power these lenslets or the multiple segments have. But what you can see here on the basis of 1-year data is that, again, they're able to slow the progression of myopia by more than half. So we're talking about roughly 63% for spherical equivalent and 64% for axial length. And on the back of these results, we are still waiting peer-reviewed publications, but on the back of these results, Essilor have launched Stellest lens, and we know that Stellest lens is currently available in China, and as of last week, it was launched in Taiwan as well. So that's with the spectacle lenses. And as you can see, we've come a long way from trying to control the progression of myopia with progressive addition spectacle lenses to the more recent generation spectacle lens designs. And there are a number of other groups that are working on lens designs at the moment. So over the next few years, you're going to see multiple spectacle lens-based designs hitting the market. If we look at contact lenses, so again, I've listed the various contact lens types that have been used to slow the progression of myopia. We can refer to these as multifocal lenses, multifocal-like lenses, what we call peripheral plus lenses, and also an extended depth of focus lens. And remember, when I was talking about the spectacle lens efficacy, I was pointing you all to this similar graph where I said, you know, generally spectacle lenses, with the exception of some of them, had less efficacy. Now, if you look at contact lenses, for a long time, we've been seeing greater efficacy with contact lenses. So just on this graph, you can see that many of these lens designs are giving us control over 25%. Most of them appear to be in the range of 30 to 40%. There's one exception here with bifocal lenses, but if we leave that out, we sort of hitting about 50% mark with contact lenses. So with that, if we just take a look at some of the important contact lens designs, first one is MiSight. It is important because this is the only FDA approved myopia control strategy that is available at the present time. This was on the back of data which was a study which was conducted for 3 years, and FDA found the data to be convincing, and they granted control for this lens. So the MiSight lens, as most of you are aware of, is an offering from Cooper Vision. It is a soft lens design that is available. You know, you can see that there's one base curve, one diameter, and it's available in a range of powers. So when we look at the MiSight lens, it's got a clear central zone and a ring of positive power of about 2 diopters. Another clear zone. When I say clear zone, this particular zone is corrected for the distance refractive error, and then it's followed by another ring of positive power. And Cooper Vision conducted a study for 4 years. So you have these 2 groups. You have the MiSight group, and you have the control ProClear 1-day group. And at the end of 3 years, they put everybody into the MiSight lens, and they followed them up for a further period of time. So when you look at the data for 3 years, you can see that there is a wide separation, both in terms of spherical equivalent as well as axial length. And again, if you look at the data, you can see that it is a little over 50%. And this is one of the longer studies we've seen so far. It is quite expensive to run long-term clinical trials. They have conducted a trial of substantial duration. At the end of 3 years, you can see that there is a significant difference, and it's over 3/4 of a diopter. And year 4, when they changed everybody to the test lenses, so you can see how the ProClear control lenses, the slope is increasing, but when you put them into the test lenses, you see a slight change in the slope. And they consider this to be as evidence that once you switch somebody into a test lens, you can change the way the myopia is progressing for that particular eye. Now, MiSight is available in many countries. It may not be available in all countries, and therefore usually we get asked the question, what do we do? And there's now clear evidence that shows that any multifocal, center distance multifocal lens is quite effective in slowing the progression of myopia. Even prior to this study, there have been a number of studies that have reported that multifocal contact lenses appear to be effective, but this is again another comprehensive study which was conducted for 3 years. It's the BLINK study. And the study looked at 2 add powers, 1.5 and 2.5. And they monitored the children for 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, so this is the little summary box here, those that were wearing single vision contact lenses progressed by approximately 1 diopter. And you can see that those in the high AD power, which is 2.5 diopters, they had approximately 43% reduction in the progression of myopia. Slightly less with the medium AD power, and this is increasingly becoming evident that you tend to have significant amounts of myopia control with slightly higher AD powers, definitely at or above 2 diopters. So that's the advice at the present time. And again, you can see that the data is quite consistent, both in terms of change in spherical equivalent as well as change in axial length. Now there's another lens type. So with the multifocal lenses, these are center distance multifocal lenses, but there is also some evidence that seems to suggest that even other lens types might be effective. So any center distance multifocal contact lens and as well as any other multifocal contact lens should be effective for myopia control. There's another lens that is being tested for myopia. This is a marketed product. It is called Natural View from a company called Visioneering Technologies. Unlike the other groups that have provided the evidence from what we call randomized clinical trials, which means that you take a group of children and you simply randomly assign them to the test group and to the control group. You fit them with lenses and you follow them up for a certain period of time. That is what we call as level 1 evidence because it's quite powerful. In this particular study, they did not do such a study. What they did was they had some data on what the progression was before they put them into visioneering lenses. So this particular graph here, you can see that this is the progression for each of the children before they went into visioneering lenses. And what they show is that this person, as you can see, was progressing in the last 12 months. And once they went into visioneering lenses, you can see that it seemed to have reversed the myopia. Whereas in many of the other cases, you see what we call flattening of myopia. And the data is quite interesting because they talk about quite a significant reduction in the progression of myopia, nearly 95%. And that's quite evident from these lines here, which are practically flat. But again, we've got to take this data with a little pinch of salt because it's what we call retrospective. So they sort of looked at the evidence. It was not very well controlled. I'm sorry about that. My slides seem to be jumping. There was no cycloplegic refraction. They used what we call self-historical control. And there's a couple of other things that we do in terms of data where we do things like to make sure that the groups are homogeneous and uniform. That was not done in this particular case. But in a sense, what we want to take from this particular slide is that there's another lens type that's offered and is said to be effective for slowing the progression of myopia. The disc lens, this is from Hong Kong Polytechnic University. It's a lens that is available in China and Hong Kong and a couple of other countries. This again is very similar to that of a center distance multifocal, and it's got alternating plus zones of 2.5 diopters. So you see the clear zone and then you see the alternating zones. And even though when we talk of 25% reduction in spherical equivalent, what they found was that when they actually looked at children that wore these lenses consistently for their waking hours, or when we look at compliant lens wearers, this rate increased to 50%. So again, this is a lens that is available in the market in some of the countries. Now, there is another lens called Milo, and this lens is CE approved for myopia control in Europe, and it's a lathe cut offering. It's a customized lens, and it's a product of Brian Holland Vision Institute. And it works on the hypothesis of what we call retinal image quality, and I'll quickly take you through that. So when you fit an eye with a single vision contact lens, centrally the image is on the retina. And as we said previously, peripherally, the image falls behind the retina. So when we do a plot of what we call the retinal image quality across 40 degrees, which means that, you're looking at the retinal image quality across the back of the eye, then because centrally the image is on the retinal image quality is higher at the center and it's lower at the periphery. So globally, you can see that there's a lot of yellow here. Red means good retinal image quality. Now, if you look at the retinal image plane behind the retina, so that was at the retina, you look at it behind the retina, because because the image comes to a focus behind the retina, now you can see that there is a lot of red in the periphery and in the center, because that image is there and we are looking at the retinal image plane behind the retina, it is sort of yellow. So what this is saying is that generally the retinal image quality in a myopic eye that is corrected with a single vision, either a spectacle or a contact lens, is much better. Globally, there's a much better retinal image quality behind the retina. And it is hypothesized that having a good retinal image quality behind the retina will drive the eye to go in that direction, or it stimulates the eye to grow posteriorly. So that's what the basis of this hypothesis is. And what we want to do then is to try and deliberately reduce the retinal image quality for points behind the retina, so the eye does not have an incentive to grow in that direction. And when we look at the lens design, so this is what we refer to as an extended depth of focus contact lens. Unlike the other contact lens designs that we discussed previously, this lens does not have any discrete zones on with respect to the power profile of the lens. So you don't see a clear central zone or you don't see a peripheral zone. What you see is what we call this non-monotonic power profile, because the power profile goes up and then it comes down and there are no discrete zones. So what we refer to as aperiodic. So this is what we call a non-monotonic aperiodic lens design. And we tested a couple of these lens designs. And again, we found that these lenses were able to slow the progression of myopia. There's better control in what we call compliant varus, as with some of the other designs. So with that, if we sort of take a quick scan across the optical design. So we spoke about the spectacles. We said, the earlier ones were not that effective. The later ones are much more effective. And we also said that generally the contact lenses provided a more consistent result in terms of myopia control. And we can say the same thing of orthokeratology. Orthokeratology, as you can see, seems to be quite consistent and providing quite good results in terms of myopia control. And the strength of the evidence is in the number of clinical studies that have been conducted, which show that it is quite feasible to slow the progression of myopia. Now, quickly, people might ask, look, when we talk about myopia control, we say 30% in one group, 30% less in one group compared to single vision lenses. So when we talk of the test group, there's number of kids within the test group. So I might be averaging the results of 50 kids. Maybe some kids have better results than the other kids. Maybe some kids don't get myopia control at all. So how are we going to know? As a clinician, your question might be, how do I know that this child is going to get myopia control? So we ran sort of complicated study design, and I'll quickly run you through that. So we took 3 groups. The first group was single vision contact lenses. This was a study we conducted in China. So they were followed up for 12 months. You can see that the first 6 months progression is given here, and then the second 6 months progression is given here. And in the second group, we know that MiSight works. So one of the eyes wore a MiSight lens and the other eye wore a single vision lens. They went for 6 months and then we crossed them over. And then we followed them up for another 6 months. And in the third group, this is a BHVI EDOF lens in one eye, and then the other eye, a single vision. And again, the same thing, we cross them over at 6 months. So now if we look at the data for the first 6 months, so you see here that the children progressed by 0.4 diopters. And if we look at group 2 and group 3 and the AccuView lens wearing eyes, you can see that it is very consistent. The eye that is wearing the single vision lens is progressing by roughly 0.4 of a diopter. If you look at the eye that is wearing the test lens, the myopia control lens, so we've got two designs here, you can see that they're able to slow the progression of myopia by approximately 40%. So when we looked at the number of tests, because now we are able to say, okay, you know, for a given child, we are able to predict, or we are able to say whether that child was benefiting with respect to slower myopia progression when we fitted them with one of these lenses. And we looked at both the groups, but the summary is that generally out of every 10 kids that you might fit with these lenses, anywhere from 7 to as much as 10 kids, or let's say 7 to 9 kids are going to show reduced progression with such myopia control strategies. So that's pretty much the take-home message from this particular study. And we also, there's questions about rebound. The question asked is, what happens if I take the child off these lenses? Is their myopia going to worsen? And we had some answers for that as well. So in the first group that were wearing single vision lenses, you can see that in the second 6 months period, they progressed by a quarter of a diopter. So when somebody was wearing my sight lens in the first 6 months, you saw that they were progressing much slower, and same with the EDOF lens. If this eye was going to have rebound, then the rate of progression of myopia in the second 6 months would have been much higher than what you would have seen with the single vision lenses. So if you look at the rate of progression of myopia in the second 6 months in the eye that wore my sight and EDOF, you can see that it's still within the range of quarter of a diopter. This is sort of a limited evidence. Ideally, you would want to run longer studies, but this data is sort of telling us that with these optical strategies, one might not see the same amount of rebound that one might see with atropine, for example. So that's sort of where the field is at the present time in terms of strategies to slow the progression of myopia. So if, as a practitioner, one is interested and one has not committed themselves or not tried myopia control and they're not sure where to start, then the tips for them would be that firstly, now there is a lot of evidence that is put together by experts in the field. And the International Myopia Institute is a group of experts from across the globe who have come together, and we work together to produce what we call key papers. There's the first lot of IMI papers that have been published, and you can see that in the first round of IMI, there have been 7 papers. We have worked on a second round of IMI papers. There's 5 IMI papers as well as a yearly update digest that will be available in 21. So if anybody is interested, this is a good place to start. You can look up International Myopia Institute. It's free membership. And these papers are freely available on the web. There is also a summary available. That's a good place to start. And there's also a number of other websites, such as the Brian Holland Vision Institute's website, which gives you snippets and some courses there as well, if you want refreshers to make sure that you're fully confident and in control of what you hear and learn. In terms of the instruments that you need for myopia control practice are no different to what you would probably have in your practice at the present time. So these are standard instruments that are there in most of the practices, but I've highlighted ones that I feel are relevant. An important one is open view refractor, autorefractor. And I say open view autorefractor It might not be that relevant for India, where optometrists are able to prescribe or use cycloplegics before they conduct refraction on a child's eye. But in many countries, optometrists are not allowed to use diagnostic drugs. And in such a situation, if you're using a closed view autorefractor, and if the room size is quite small, and I know some countries where the rooms are really small in an optical store, then it is very likely that you're sort of misreading the amount of refractive error that the child might have, because generally kids accommodate quite strongly. So you might be reading more myopia than what is naturally there for that particular eye. So in those circumstances, an open field autorefractor is a good option, because the child can look through the open field autorefractor into the distance, and then you take measures to take appropriate readings. More and more, the axial length is becoming important, because especially if you're going to practice orthokeratology, then this is the way you're going to know if the eye has slowed in progression, because refractive error becomes useless once you've commenced somebody on orthokeratology. Now with the axial length, IOL master and lens star were considered to be the gold standard instruments. More recently, Oculus, or very recently, Oculus introduced the myopia master. Now this instrument is interesting because it can measure both autorefraction as well as axial length in one single hit. So you're going to have all the data in at one go. And this instrument is again available in many of the countries. So that would be the starting point, that you try and consider to having an open field autorefractor as well as an axial length measuring device. So yes, you've armed yourself with the knowledge, you've got the right tools in your practice. What next? So when a person comes into your practice, when a child or somebody brings an individual into the practice, before we fit, we've got to try and understand the risk of onset if the person is not myopic, and if the child is myopic, what is the risk of progression? When you have the knowledge, you will understand that there are certain risk factors that we are looking for to try and understand if they're at risk of progression. For example, ethnicity, the age, parental myopia, a little bit of gender, and more recently, we've also found some environmental risk factors, like your common, how much time spent outdoors, indoors, and again, we found that sleep is also a risk factor. We very recently published a paper which found that if you sleep late, then you're at, especially children, they're at increased risk of myopia. So there's all those risk factors. You can try and do them yourself, or there are now a number of tools that are available online, which will help you evaluate the risk of onset and progression. So the BHVI myopia calculator is useful if a person is myopic. It's not useful if somebody is not myopic, because it starts at 0.5 diopters. And using that, you can try and determine what the rate of myopia progression is likely to be if there is no treatment or just standard correction, and what the net myopia might be at 17 years of age if you tried one of the myopia control options. There's other number of other calculators, or what I call risk profile assessment charts that are available, that are useful if a child is not yet myopic. For example, this particular one goes through genetics, individual characteristics, and so on. And with the Oculus Myopia Master, we collaborated with them to introduce what we call percentile charts. So based on the axial length measurement, it tries to estimate the risk of future progression and where that person might be in terms of their spherical equivalent. And when they come for follow-up visits, it plots the follow-up visit as well. The baseline percentile charts at the present time, they're available for Asian eyes, and we used a database of approximately 25,000 eyes to generate these percentile charts, which is available in the Myopia Master. The myopia master also calculates some of these risk factors, and then it provides you with a PDF report that you can give to the patient, or you can use to try and evaluate the risk. So, and similar to the Oculus myopia master, we know, and again, this field is getting really hot and crowded at the moment. There's a number of other groups that are looking at calculators, and similarly instrument-based risk calculators as well. So that brings me to the summary. I hope I've brought you all up to date in terms of what's happening in the field of myopia. And what we are able to see quite consistently is that there are a number of optical strategies that can slow the progression of myopia. What is seen from these strategies is that all of these strategies incorporate what we call relative positive power. Most of the strategies have got the plus power that seems to, we don't know what exactly the mechanism is. We call reducing hyperopic defocus and inducing myopic defocus, but that seems to be quite effective in slowing the progression of myopia. Very clearly, the field is moving quite rapidly. We've got a number of strategies that are available. And like I said, there's a number of other strategies that are in clinical trials at the present time. And we are beginning to see higher levels of efficacy as well. And it seems like myopia management is within the reach of every practitioner. So with that, I'll stop, and thanks very much for your attention. And thanks again for giving me the opportunity to present the first memorial lecture for the late senior Turakhia. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Padmaja. That was indeed like, all the advancements. And in fact, you also provided very important information to the clinicians who would like to start or engage in myopia management. So thank you very much for the excellent session. So we have a couple of questions, and I think I would just take it up for you. So one of the delegate wants to know a little bit more about the optics of the DIMS. How does it work?
Okay, so the DIMS spectacle lens, when you look at the lens, you can't really see this little, how best do I explain? I mean, we call them multiple segments lenslets. They're like little bubbles. So think of a bubble wrap. So the lens looks like it's got a clear central zone, and in the mid periphery, there's this bubble wrap. Each of the bubble is 3.5 diopters more than the central zone. So if somebody is minus 3.5 in the center, then your bubble effectively means that you're plano in power. So when you wear such a lens, the hypothesis is that these bubbles create myopic defocus. They're putting the image in front of the retina. So centrally, you have the image on the retina, and in the mid-periphery, they're reducing hyperopic defocus or inducing myopic defocus. And for some reason, and we've seen from a number of other studies that that seems to be slowing eye growth. It doesn't completely arrest eye growth. Again, I mean, that's difficult to know unless you examine each child individually, but they seem to be effective in slowing the eye growth.
Okay, thank you. Then the next question is how to quantify the retinal image quality in periphery. You did share about the retinal image quality. So what did you use in?
It's not something that you can evaluate in a clinic on the eye. It's an in vitro model that we use to assess what the retinal image quality is. But it's used to design some of the lenses. So from a clinician's perspective, I guess all they would have to be concerned about is looking at the evidence in terms of what has been found with respect to myopia control, and if such a lens design is available for them, and how they monitor the progression of myopia in the clinic. So the standards for monitoring myopia in a clinic pretty much the same across the board, irrespective of the hypothesis. So we've got hypothesis that talks about contrast, that talks about hyperopic defocus, myopic defocus, retinal image quality, and so on. My point to the practitioners is that you don't have to really concern yourself that much unless you're interested in the research aspects of it. The two things that you have to evaluate as a practitioner is how is the eye changing with respect to myopia, so using spherical equivalent, and increasingly how whether you can actually quantify the eye growth and you can actually see that the eye is growing slower than before.
Okay. You did talk about some of the challenges with the use of diagnostic drugs like cycloplegia in like many countries, including India. So what are the other challenges that you envisage when it comes to myopia control in clinical practice, like one practitioner wants to? Because if you want to just start myopia control in your practice, what are the potential challenges?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing is clearly making sure that you have looked at the eye and evaluated the eye appropriately, right? So that's where the cycloplegic refraction becomes really important. If you do not have access to cycloplegia, then you have to make sure that the child is sufficiently relaxed with their accommodation when you're measuring their refraction, which means that you have to make sure that they're looking into the distance, making sure things like your room lights are dim, and doing the appropriate refraction for that particular child. That's the key. Otherwise, it's very likely you're overestimating the myopia, because young kids accommodate so much that you end up treating them for what is not there. And the way you can keep yourself in check is to try and consider the refractive error against the visual acuity. If the visual acuity is normal, but you're reading high levels of myopia, then you're going wrong. So I would advise everybody to cross-check that. It's a simple check, but if you take that measure into account, then it's very likely that you tick that box. The second challenge, I don't know if it's really a challenge, is or I do say it's a challenge, is trying to have access to sufficient number of products, because myopia control is getting so easy and simple that all you have to do is you have to make sure that you've got the right instruments and you've got access to the right products. In that sense, I am aware that we don't have as many products in India to control myopia as some of the other countries. I don't think it's because they don't want to send products into India. The companies are not thinking about India. It's just that there are other countries where myopia is so prevalent that that's their focus at the present time. But very clearly, I'm pretty sure that those products will reach India as well. So at the present time, you might not have access to all the products. So we are talking about DIMS, we are talking about SLR Stellus technology, we are talking about newer lens types, we are talking about multifocals and ortho-K. You might not have access to all of them, but you certainly do have access to orthokeratology, you have access to multifocal lenses, and I'm not sure it is possible that you'll have access to Hoya lenses fairly soon, if not there already, and same with SLR as well. And again, instruments also getting easier to access, so that should not be a challenge.
Yeah, I know it's like pretty much evolving, but we'll be there somewhere soon. Yeah, and then you did speak about sleep disturbances and your latest publication, and I think there's a question on that, like maybe does blue coat coatings and stuff like that in addition would reduce in myopia control, like anything?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So our study basically, and we were able to validate that, and it seems to be the same both for onset and progression. What we found was that later the child slept, this was after 9 p.m., the risk was increasing. So the question is, why is it that there is an increased risk? as the child is going to sleep later. We think it's sort of linked with the environmental factors because yes, you're likely to be at home, and if you're not sleeping, you're very likely to be doing close work. You're likely to be doing close work in reduced illumination because nighttime, less illumination and stuff like that. So there's all those risk factors that get compounded the longer you spend time doing those sort of myopogenic activities. With blue light, there's some research that seems to be suggestive of blue light increasing dopamine, release of dopamine. And strangely enough, dopamine is set to control eye growth. So if that piece of hypothesis is correct, then blue light is actually should be protective for myopia. So that's the bit which is not very clear at the present time. And people have done some studies looking at it, but there's no clear data on what blue light does to myopia at this point of time.
Okay, so this couple of more questions, and you just told about the Indian market. So the question is like, when can we see all these lenses at competitive pricing like in India, and any steps being taken for wide and quick acceptance of the products for the Indian market?
I have to say, I wish I know the answer to that one. But I do know, like I said, it's not that the companies are not interested in those sort of markets. It's just the economics of where the prevalence of myopia is high at the present time, and likely the reason why they're more easily available in the Asia Pacific countries. And the second other important reason for us to think about or be cognizant about is the regulatory approvals for these products as well. With spectacle lenses, it's not so much a hurdle, but contact lenses, there's regulatory approvals that are needed, and companies are working through them. I mean, if I'd given the same lecture 2 years ago, my talk would have been entirely different, right? Because at that time, half the stuff that I presented today would not have been there on those slides. So that's the reason why I'm saying it's sort of, yes, the field has changed quite rapidly, but it's changed at the end where we're doing a lot of research, and all of that has to be funneled into products, and then it has to flow onto the market. But I think it's going to be fairly soon that you're likely to see some of those products.
Sure. The last question is on anisometropia, like when there is an unequal progression, especially when you spoke about the crossover trials, it does look like there's a possibility that you can use these control lenses just in one eye. Do you have any thoughts about like when there is unequal, so the hypothesis is that there's going to be unequal defocuses. So when there's unequal progression and larger discrepancy, could we just use?
Yeah. I think you can, because the contralateral studies, as you said, are indicative that myopia control works in one eye, and there have been other studies as well where they fitted lens only in the dominant or the non-dominant eye, and they're able to show that it slows progression. So yes, generally speaking, anisometropia, yeah, you should be able to fit them okay, but the percent of eyes that are anisometropic is very small, and that's been looked at as well. But yes, as a practitioner, you're likely to be seeing some of those cases. You definitely can fit them.
Okay, sure. Just request you to stay with us for 5 more minutes when, when Turakhia sir's family just would like to share their memories about Rajnikanth sir, and you could just take rest and stop sharing and drink your water. And I also see that the sun has set at the background now.
Yeah, it's become dark, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so I know all of you must have now learned quite a bit about myopia management from Professor Padmaja, and as we know that Rajnikanth Turakhia's heart is his family. We have his family members who joined with us today. So on behalf of the family, I now request Snehal sir to share a few words about his beloved dad.
Thank you, Rizwana. Am I audible?
Yes, you are, sir.
Thank you very much, OATN, for giving me an opportunity to speak a bit about my dad. I would just like to touch upon and highlight some of the aspects of his life. I am truly blessed to be his son. Over the years, he had been a tremendous source of inspiration, not only to me and my team, but to several innumerable people who came across him during his illustrious career. For people who knew him, he was always that typical beaming and full of energy personality, and there would never be a dull moment when he's around. His enthusiasm was infectious, and he would bring a smile almost instantly when one meets him. I have been witness to many of his interactions with people from all walks of life during his career, and in fact, that is one of the memorable things, as I got to learn a lot from that. He had mentioned he has mentored, many optometrists and staff over the years, not only those who worked under him, but even from outside. And in fact, he has encouraged and guided those keen to open their own practice. He never regarded them as competition. Amongst the most memorable things are, of course, his pearls of wisdom. He was a very strict disciplinarian and has instilled these values in my family and the organization. I recall the very first day after graduation when I joined the business. He said it's a family tradition to follow certain core values in business and to ensure that these are never compromised amongst that very few I would like to just highlight. He would always say that to maintain very, very high ethical standards in all aspects of business dealing, whether it's the customer, whether it's with suppliers or the vendors. And no matter how much competition you would face eventually in future, never forget that two things: quality products and quality service will always survive the test of time. And this, we find it so relevant in today's time that these things have really proven that these survive the test of time. One of the, of course, the most important things is treat your employees as an extended family, which he always did and which we continue to do. And among the last things I would like to say is be passionate and enjoy your work. This way it will never stress you. So very grateful for these pearls of wisdom, and will always strive hard to uphold these values. In fact, last 1 year since he left for his heavenly abode has been overwhelming to hear and see from every nook and corner the love and affection people have showered on him, and I'm grateful to all for the same. That's it. And my special thanks to Professor Padmaja, my senior, for being the chief guest on this special occasion and sharing your immense knowledge on this fast evolving subject of myopia. Thanks to the viewers to take out your time and be a part of this program. And of course, many thanks to OATN, past and the present team, for this honor given to my dad by putting across this whole program in his memory. Truly grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I mean, it's been our pleasure and blessing, we should say, because OATN, in fact, is honored by honoring him with the Lifetime Achievement Award during the 2018 Optent. And he's been a major source of support for us and had been a chief guest to our World Sight Day walkathon as well in 2016. So, and all our members are, our founding president, Sankaridurg sir, yesterday was telling us that he has almost like more than 5 decades of association with sir, and he was sharing all fond memories as how Turakhia sir shaped his career, like Sankaridurg sir's career. So we are indeed truly blessed to have all of you with us today to celebrate the legacy of his life. So thank you very much, sir. And so with this, we move ahead to the vote of thanks. That's going to be given by Mr. Jyoti Balaji, our immediate past General Secretary. So over to you, JJP sir.
Okay, am I audible? Okay.
Yes, you are.
I'm not going to thank in particular order. Probably I will thank my own order. Usually when we start our online session, okay, And the moment you move to question and answer, nearly 50% or nearly 60% of the participation drops. But if you look at the number of participation, nearly 1/3 is dropped, 2/3 is staying back. Probably I want to thank especially the 2/3 who is staying back. And second, I would like to thank Snehal personally, and of course the entire Turakhia family accepting our proposal of starting such a memorial session and be the part of the session as well. And today, the star of today's evening, Professor Padmaja Sankaridurg, we'd like to thank you on behalf of the OATN as well as the memorial team. And in a short span, you accepted our invitation and you did a complete justice the topic which was given to you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, sir. So before we just wrap up, we'll do a quick, now that we are in the virtual world, I request everybody to open up your camera so that we can do a quick virtual group photo. So I think Purnima can just do the photo. And thanks Dr. KK for joining with the entire team from Aravind. So thanks the entire team who's joined with us. And so please switch on your camera so that, let me see if Professor Padmaja. Okay, so let's just quickly do a screenshot save of this memorable occasion.
Camera friendly.
I took that please.
Okay, so we did catch hold of all of you. So I know that okay, so this must be the last working day for, I think, Professor Padmaja, before you close down for your Christmas and New Year holiday. So thank you once again. And so wishing all of you a very, very happy New Year and Merry Christmas ahead. So on behalf of OATN, do you want to say anything before we wrap up for the day, Professor Padmaja?
Thanks again for having me. It's a privilege to deliver the first memorial lecture. And thanks again, Snehal, and to the Turakhia family. My regards to all of them. Regards and respect to all of you. And wish you all a safe and healthy holiday season coming up.
Wish you the same.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.